Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, then please consider subscribing. Most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story and be the first to hear. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. So, Aina fell prone to spinning tall tales, but what happened to me a couple of years back was something that'd give even the toughest trucker a cold chill up his spine. Always was a practical man, not much for ghost stories or weird goings-on, but this story changed my perspective a bit. So it all began a mediocre day, taking goods down to a small business in the next state. It was a scenic route that I'd taken a million times before. You just never get bored of it. With tall pine trees lining the highway, their tops dancing against the clear blue sky. But this day was a bit different. I decided to take a shortcut, a meandering path cutting through a dense forest. Figured it'd save me a good hour or two. After all, I'm a man always up for an adventure. I started down that shortcut, not thinking much about it. The road was narrow, but my truck, a burly 18-wheeler, didn't seem to mind. It took the sharp turns with ease, the tires crunching over the gravel. At first, everything seemed okay. The day was winning, but I wasn't worried. I had my GPS, and I knew I'd be out of the forest before it got pitch dark. But then something strange started happening. I noticed I was passing the same gnarled oak tree. The first couple of times I drove by that weird-looking oak tree, I brushed it off. I mean, we all see things that aren't there when we're tired, right? But when I passed by it a third, fourth, and even a fifth time, I started to panic. It felt like being in a bad dream where you're trying to run away from something, but your legs won't move. The more times I drove by that tree, the lonelier I felt. The inside of my truck cab felt smaller, and the trees outside seemed bigger and scarier. They looked like giants watching me, their branches moving in the wind as if they were talking to each other. The feeling of seeing the same things over and over was getting to me. It was like a drum that wouldn't stop beating, making me feel more and more scared. I remember looking really hard out of my windshield, trying to spot anything that was different in the trees or the road. I'd look at that old oak tree every time I drove by it. It was creepy looking, and seeing it over and over made me feel really trapped. For a second, when I'd drive past it, I'd feel a bit better, thinking maybe I'd finally gotten out of the loop. But it would always show up again, making me realize I was still stuck. To start with, I thought it was just a weird coincidence, my mind playing tricks on me after driving for hours on end. But when it happened for the fourth, fifth, sixth time, my heart raced, and it felt like I was stuck in some terrible nightmare, where you're running but not getting anywhere. Every time I circled past that odd-looking oak tree, a sense of loneliness started creeping in. The walls of my truck cab felt like they were closing in, and the forest outside seemed menacing. The trees were tall and intimidating, their branches rustling in the wind, almost as if they were whispering things I wasn't meant to hear. The same scenery, repeating itself over and over, started to mess with me, building up a constant, relentless fear. I remember hunching over my steering wheel, trying to spot anything at all, that looked different. Every time I drove past that gnarled oak tree, its eerie shape stood out, reminding me that I was trapped. But as soon as I leave it behind, I feel a temporary relief, thinking that maybe this time I've broken free. But then, just like clockwork, it would show up again, plunging me back into the unnerving loop. My GPS, my trusty companion, chose that moment to give up. The screen went blank, and no amount of smacking the dashboard brought it back. A growing anxiety clawed at my guts, but I pushed it down. I was a seasoned trucker. I'd dealt with worse. I decided to keep going, hoping to somehow break the endless loop I seemed to be trapped in. That's when I saw him. A figure, cloaked in a hood, standing by the roadside. Now, I ain't the sort to pick up hitchhikers, especially not in the middle of nowhere, but I was desperate for directions. I pulled up next to him, rolling down my window, about to ask him the way out. But the look he gave me, it wasn't normal. It was a mix of surprise, fear, and something I couldn't quite place, like you'd seen a ghost. I felt a little cold feeling run down the back of me, and without another word, I put pedal to the metal and sped off, not looking back. Now here's where things got really eerie. I saw the same figure again and again, each time standing by the roadside, giving me that same peculiar look. It was like I was trapped in some nightmarish merry-go-round. My heart was beating rapidly in my chest, each beat echoing my growing fear. My truck, sensing my panic perhaps, decided it had enough. The engine sputtered and died, and I found myself stranded in the middle of a dark forest, haunted by a specter in a hood. The tank was almost dry, I was out of luck, and hope was fading fast. My eyelids grew heavy, the stress and fear pulling me into unconsciousness. I locked the doors, said a quick prayer, and drifted off into a restless sleep. When I awoke, the early morning sun was filtering through the trees, casting long shadows that danced around my truck. I was alone, the hooded figure gone. Suddenly, there was a knock on my window, making me jump. It was a forest ranger, his face a mix of concern and surprise. He led me out of the forest, his truck pulling mine, breaking the loop that had held me prisoner all night. I never took that shortcut again. I've tried to make sense of that night, tried to chalk it up to fatigue or stress. But deep down, I know there was something uncanny about that forest, about that hooded figure. I don't know if it was a spirit or just a figment of my imagination. A few years back, Joe, a co-worker of mine, and I were assigned a job hauling timber. The order was from a construction company nestled in the distant corners of a rural county, a good day's drive away from the yard. Our rig was loaded, the logs stacked neatly, the smell of fresh pine permeating the air. The journey started smoothly, the hum of the truck's engine synchronizing with the soft tunes playing on the radio. The highway was spread out before us, a long and winding path under the silver glow of the moon. This was our life, miles and miles of open road, our existence bound within the confines of the truck's cabin, the world outside whizzing past us, a blur of fleeting images. As we were driving along, a small shape by the side of the road caught Joe's eye. At first, it was just a dark speck in the distance, but as we got closer, it became clear that the figure was a little girl. Alone, in the middle of nowhere, on a near-deserted road, under the cold gaze of the moon. It was a sight that stopped us in our tracks. It wasn't something you'd expect to see, and it instantly filled us with a deep sense of unease. The girl couldn't have been more than 8 or 9. She was huddled against the chill of the night, her little form dwarfed by the vast, open landscape. Her clothes were ragged, her hair unkempt, and even from a distance, we could see the fear etched on her face. Every instinct in our bodies told us something was terribly wrong. We pulled the truck over, the rig's massive tires crunching against the gravel as we came to a halt. Even though we were a good few yards away, we could see her clearer now under the harsh glare of the truck's headlights. There was an innocence about her, a kind of vulnerability that tugged at our hearts. She looked scared of lost, her wide eyes glimmering in the pale light. We decided to call the police right then. It seemed like the only logical thing to do. As Joe dialed the number, I kept my eyes on the little girl, her frail figure trembling in the cold. Every bone in my body screamed that she was in trouble, that she needed help. As we waited for the police to arrive, things took a turn for the worse. Out of the surrounding darkness, a group of men emerged. Their sudden appearance took us by surprise, their menacing silhouettes illuminated under the truck's headlights. The sight of their shotguns sent a sharp sensation through me. The air instantly turned electric with danger, and our initial concern for the girl twisted into a gut-wrenching realization. She had been a decoy, a lure to catch us off guard. The men didn't waste any time. They hopped into our rig and sped off into the night, leaving us standing in the dust. We felt a sense of disbelief, our minds reeling as we tried to piece together the events of the last few minutes. We had walked into a trap, and now our load was gone, stolen under our noses. As we stood there, the flashing lights of the police cars cut through the night. We quickly informed them of the situation, filling in the details of the theft and the description of our truck. We watched as they sped off into the night, chasing after the stolen rig, the hope of retrieving our load fading with each passing minute. We'd have been fooled, tricked by the innocent face of a child. It was a bitter pill to swallow, a stark reminder of the dangers lurking in the shadows of the night. As we waited for news from the police, we couldn't help but replay the events in our heads, wondering if there was something we could have done differently, something that could have prevented the whole fiasco. Back on the highway, the red taillights of our stolen truck vanished into the distance, the night swallowing any trace of it. The chill of the night seeped into our bones as we stood there, a sense of surrealism enveloping us. A couple of hours later, we received a call from the police. They'd managed to track down our truck, the logs still intact in the back. The men were arrested, their plot to steal our load foiled. Despite the successful recovery, The incident left me a little on edge, a chilling reminder of the unexpected dangers that came with our job. From that day forward, we carried a heightened sense of vigilance, our eyes always scanning our surroundings, and the trust we had in the world forever shaken. This was an event that added an unsought thrill to our usually mundane runs. It was an experience that made our trucker stories around the campfire a little bit more exciting and a lot more real, forever reminding us of that one night when a harmless-looking little girl led us into a carefully laid trap. This all happened during my 10th year of truck driving. Up until that point, I thought I'd seen it all, but nothing could have prepared me for the strangeness of that autumn night. It was just another hull on Road 76, a path so familiar I could probably navigate it blindfolded. The air had that unique crispness to it, a clear sign that winter was just around the corner. I had a fresh delivery in the back, nothing too noteworthy, just a batch of goods destined for a business a few hours out of town. As a long-haul trucker, you get used to the solitude, the quiet hum of the engine acting as a constant companion. As night fell, I flicked on the headlights, casting long, bright cones of light that pierced through the darkness. The road ahead of me stretched out, an unending ribbon of asphalt flanked by open fields. It was about an hour into the drive when I noticed something unusual in the far reaches of the headlight glow. It was a person, a woman, standing alone on the side of the road. Her clothing was the first thing that struck me. She was dressed in what appeared to be traditional Chinese garb, the kind of attire you'd expect to see in an epic Chinese period drama. As I was driving, I'd noticed something up ahead that caught my eye. At first, I thought it was a signpost or maybe some sort of roadkill, but as I got closer, it became clear it was a person. More specifically, it was a woman standing alone by the roadside. Now, this wasn't something I saw every day. Sure, you'd get the occasional hitchhiker or someone whose car had broken down, but this was different. She was standing off to the side, not really trying to flag anyone down. Plus, her clothes were unusual. She was wearing a traditional Chinese dress. It was bright, decorated with intricate patterns, and not something you'd expect to see in this part of the country. I slowed down my truck and pulled over. Even from the cab, I could tell something was wrong. She looked scared, her eyes wide and her body stiff. I knew I couldn't just leave her there, so I decided to try and help. When I got out and tried to talk to her, that's when things got even stranger. She didn't speak English. Instead, she spoke what sounded like Mandarin. I don't speak Mandarin, but I recognized the language from some of my friends back home. Even though we couldn't understand each other, it was clear she needed help. After some miming and pointing, I managed to get her to climb into the truck. I decided to take her to the nearest police station. It seemed like the best thing to do. Thinking on my feet, I decided to take her to the nearest police station. She reluctantly climbed into the truck, her small figure dwarfed by the large cabin. The sense of fear was clear, but I shrugged it off, attributing it to the unusual circumstances. We hadn't traveled far when I felt a sudden thud beneath the truck. It was unexpected and loud enough to make me wince. I thought for sure I'd hit something. It felt like the size of a small animal, maybe a fox or a raccoon, and my heart sank. I hated the idea that I might have hurt some creature just going about its night. I immediately hit the brakes, glancing at the woman to ensure she was okay. She seemed a bit shaken, but otherwise fine. I reassured her with a wave, indicating I would step out and check what had happened. She just nodded, watching me with wide eyes as I opened the cab door and stepped into the night. It was cold outside, the wind whistling through the open fields surrounding the road. The only illumination came from the taillights of the truck, casting a red glow onto the asphalt. I moved towards the back, carefully scanning the road for any sign of an injured animal, but found nothing. Confused, I checked the undercarriage of the truck. No signs of damage. I looked again at the road, but it was still empty. No blood, no animal. It was as if we hadn't hit anything at all. With a shrug, I decided to return to the cab, thinking it must have been a piece of debris or a large rock on the road that had caused the jolt. But as I climbed back into the truck, my blood ran cold. The woman was gone. The passenger seat was empty. It was like she had vanished into thin air. I blinked, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me, but no, she was truly gone. The odd thing was, the seat was still in its original state, no signs of struggle, not even an indentation of where she had been sitting. I jumped out of the truck, looking around the immediate vicinity. Nothing. I called out into the night, but my voice was swallowed up by the darkness, leaving only silence in its wake. It was like she had never been there. I spent a good chunk of time looking around, hoping to find some sign of her, but found nothing. Finally, I pulled out my phone to call the police, but of course, no signal. There I was alone on a deserted road with a truckload of goods, and a story that was hard to believe even for me. It was an eerie, unsettling end to what was supposed to be a routine drive. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.